place was loud in the way busy places usually are. Not with shouting, but with movement. Shoes brushing the floor. Low voices passing by. The soft echo of footsteps. In the middle of it all stood a piano. It was polished, clean, and clearly cared for. Most people walked past it without stopping. Some glanced at it for a second, then continued on their way. It was there more for beauty than for use. He entered quietly. No one noticed him at first. He wasn't trying to draw attention. His clothes were worn but clean. Nothing about him stood out except maybe the way he moved. There was hesitation in his steps, like he was unsure if he belonged in that space. He stopped a few feet away from the piano and just looked at it. For a long moment he didn't move. His eyes followed the keys, black and white, lined up perfectly. His hands stayed by his sides, fingers slightly curled. Anyone watching closely might notice his breathing slow down, as if the noise around him was fading. To him, the piano didn't look like furniture. It looked like a doorway to something familiar. People passed him without a second thought. A few glanced at him, then at the piano, then away again. Some probably assumed he was just curious. Others may have felt uncomfortable without knowing why. He didn't fit the image of someone expected to sit down and play. And in places like this, expectations often decide who gets a chance and who doesn't. After standing there for a while, he took a small step forward. Then another. He stopped again, almost pulling himself back, like he was afraid of crossing an invisible line. Finally, he spoke. His voice was quiet but steady. He asked if he could touch the piano. Not play a concert. Not perform. Just touch it. The question caught nearby staff off guard. One person looked at him, then at the piano, then back at him again. The answer came quickly, almost automatically. No, the piano wasn't open for public use. It was there for display. Rules were rules. He nodded slowly. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He stepped back, hands clasped together, eyes still locked on the instrument. Most people would have walked away at that point. That's what was expected. But he stayed. Minutes passed. The noise of the place continued around him. Laughter from somewhere far off. A phone ringing. A child calling out. Through it all, he remained standing near the piano, calm and patient. Someone whispered to another person while glancing in his direction. Someone else frowned slightly, as if wondering why he hadn't moved on yet. The piano remained untouched, silent, waiting. He took a breath and stepped forward again. This time his hands were visible, open, almost trembling. He spoke again, more clearly now. He explained that he only wanted a moment. Just a few seconds. He promised to be careful. He promised not to damage anything. There was something in his tone that made a few people pause. It wasn't desperation. It was sincerity. Still, the response was hesitant. The staff looked uncertain. They glanced at each other. Letting him touch the piano felt like a risk. If something went wrong, they would be responsible. And so the answer stayed the same. No. A quiet disappointment crossed his face, but he didn't show anger. Instead, he lowered his head slightly, as if accepting something he had faced many times before. He stepped back again. But he didn't leave. As more people noticed him, the space around the piano slowly changed. What had been a simple corner of the room became a place of quiet tension. Some people felt sympathy. Others felt suspicion. A few wondered why this mattered so much to him. To him, it mattered more than they could see. He remembered other pianos. Old ones. Broken ones. Keys that stuck. Rooms that were too cold or too small. He remembered learning without lessons, without guidance, without applause. Music had never been a hobby for him. It had been a place to hide, a way to breathe when life felt too heavy. Standing there now, so close yet so far, stirred something deep inside him. His fingers twitched slightly, like they remembered movements his mind hadn't yet allowed. A woman nearby watched him closely. She noticed the way his eyes softened when he looked at the piano. Not greedy, not demanding, just longing. She didn't say anything, but she didn't look away either. Someone else checked the time and sighed. This was becoming awkward. Why wouldn't he just leave? but he stayed quiet and respectful. He never once tried to touch the piano without permission. That mattered, even if few noticed. After a while, he took a step back and leaned against a nearby wall. It looked like he was preparing himself to walk away. His shoulders dropped slightly, like he was letting go of a hope he had held too tightly. Then, just before turning, he glanced at the piano one last time. That look stopped someone. It wasn't dramatic. There were no tears. Just a deep, honest sadness mixed with acceptance. The kind that comes from knowing you tried, even when you expect it to be refused. The person who saw it felt something shift. They had followed the rules without thinking. Now they hesitated. They looked at the piano again. It was strong, well-built, made to be played. And the man hadn't asked for much. As he began to turn away, a voice called out softly, asking him to wait. He froze. The noise around them continued, unaware that something small but important was about to change. He turned back slowly, unsure if he had heard correctly. His heart beat faster, but he kept his face calm. Nothing had been promised yet. But for the first time since he arrived, hope returned quietly to his eyes. And the piano remained silent, waiting for what might come next. The moment seemed to stretch in the quiet of the busy place. People moved around him, some glancing at him, some ignoring him, but no one understood what had caught their attention. The man stood by the piano, waiting, and the air around him felt heavier somehow, filled with unspoken questions. Why was he still here? Why did he care so much? Whispers started, soft at first, then louder as more people noticed. Some said he looked like he had no right to be there. Others wondered if he was trouble or just sad. A few simply felt curious. He didn't argue or shout. He didn't wave his hands or demand attention. He stayed quiet, patient, holding himself with a kind of gentle dignity that made people pause without realizing it. He looked around the room slowly, noticing the faces. Some were focused on their phones, scrolling and tapping, barely noticing the piano or him. Others had stopped, their heads tilted slightly, eyebrows raised. He could feel their eyes on him, but he didn't let it bother him. He only wanted a chance. One small chance. A staff member approached, hesitant. "Sir, the piano isn't open to the public," they said softly. He nodded, his expression calm. "I know," he replied quietly. "I just want to try. Only for a moment." The staff member hesitated. There were rules to follow. They had to think about responsibility, damage, and safety. Letting someone play without supervision seemed wrong. They looked at the piano again, its polished surface gleaming under the lights, and then back at him. His eyes were clear, honest, and patient. There was no pressure in them, no manipulation, just a simple plea. The staff member left for a moment to speak with a colleague. They whispered together, glancing at him occasionally. He waited. He didn't fidget, didn't pace, didn't look impatient. He simply remained near the piano, hands folded gently in front of him, posture respectful. People around him began to notice this. Some felt annoyed at his persistence, some felt sympathy, and some felt a spark of curiosity. What was so important that he would not leave? Time passed, slow and quiet. He remembered other times he had asked for chances, other times he had been denied. Childhood memories came back. Small rooms with old, worn instruments. Nights when he practiced alone, hoping someone would notice, hoping someone would care. Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. But he never stopped trying. He shifted slightly, taking a small step forward. A little closer to the piano. He looked down at the keys, black and white, perfectly aligned, waiting for someone to play them. He whispered to himself, almost inaudibly, words only he could hear. It was a habit, a way to calm himself. His fingers twitched slightly. They remembered movements he had not thought about in years. He had not played for a long time, but the memory was still there. It was strong. People passing by began to notice the change. He was no longer just a man standing near a piano. He had become a story they wanted to understand. A woman slowed her pace, watching him closely. A man stopped, leaning slightly to see his face. What had he done to deserve refusal? Was it just the way he looked? Or did they simply not understand? Another staff member approached, more cautiously this time. They didn't speak at first. They simply watched him. He returned the look with calm eyes, unflinching, waiting. Finally, the staff member said, "We can't let everyone play. You understand, right?" He nodded. "I understand," he said softly. "I just want a moment." This was different from before. His words carried weight, but there was no force behind them. They were not demands. They were simple, honest. The staff member felt a small pull in their chest. Something about him made them reconsider. He didn't notice the effect he had. He was focused on the piano. He imagined the sound of a single note, the way it would feel under his fingers, the vibration through his hands. Memories of past music came to him, some joyful, some sad. It was like he could feel the piano itself calling to him. Whispers grew louder around the room. People began to question each other. "Do you see him? Why is he so calm? Why hasn't he left?" Some were annoyed, thinking he was causing a scene. Others were intrigued. They couldn't explain it, but they wanted to see what would happen. They sensed that something meaningful was about to unfold, even if they didn't know why. The man took another step forward, careful, respectful. He looked at the piano keys again, running his fingers along the edge of the white ones. He did not press them, only touched lightly. It was like a gentle greeting, not a claim of ownership. People around him noticed. Some leaned in slightly. A few held their breath, sensing something delicate, almost sacred. A child wandered close, curious. The man smiled at the child softly, then returned his attention to the piano. He made a small gesture, as if to invite the child to understand without speaking. The child tilted their head, then went back to their parent, unsure of what had just happened. Yet the moment lingered, quiet and profound. The staff members whispered again. They debated silently, glancing at him, then at the piano. One finally spoke up. "He seems different. Maybe we should consider it." "Different how?" the other asked, skeptical. "I don't know. There's something about him. He's not like the others. Look at how patient he is. How calm. He's not demanding anything he can't have. Maybe just let him try." Carefully. The decision hung in the air. Rules were rules, yet something inside them stirred. They could sense the moment would not come again. It was rare, almost fragile, and it needed attention. If they refused again, it might break more than his spirit. It might break a moment of something beautiful. The man noticed the pause but didn't react. He simply waited, hands folded, standing near the piano, breathing slowly. He did not ask again, did not plead. He simply stayed, letting the moment find him rather than chasing it. Finally, one staff member approached cautiously. "We will allow it," they said softly. "But just for a moment. Just a few notes." The man's eyes brightened, but he remained composed. No sudden movements, no excited gestures. He nodded respectfully, understanding the gift he had been given. It was not just permission. It was trust. People around him leaned in slightly, their curiosity mixed with skepticism. They had expected nothing. Now they watched closely, unsure of what would happen next. Some felt tension, some hope. Everyone held their attention as if waiting for something rare and fragile to appear. He stepped forward slowly, almost reverently. His hands hovered over the keys, feeling the coolness of the smooth surface. He breathed deeply, grounding himself in the present, aware of the eyes and whispers, yet focused solely on the piano. He was no longer a stranger asking for a chance. He was someone about to speak through music, without words, without explanation, only through the notes he would create. The world around him seemed to fade. Footsteps, voices, and chatter became background noise. All that mattered was the piano, the keys, and the moment of connection that might follow. He knew that every note he played could matter, not just to him, but to those who would listen. He placed his fingers lightly on the keys, careful, respectful, aware. The first touch was gentle, exploratory. People leaned in, unsure of what to expect. A quiet anticipation spread through the room. Some felt it in their chests, a tension mixed with hope. What would happen next? And in that quiet space, just before the first note was played, he felt something stir inside him. A memory, a feeling, a promise he had made to himself long ago. He had waited for this moment patiently, with respect, with hope, with longing. And now, finally, it was here. The first touch lingered, and the room held its breath. Everyone waited for what would come, unaware that even before a sound was made, the moment had already begun to change everything. The permission felt fragile, like a small candle in the wind. He approached the piano carefully, each step measured, almost reverent. He wasn't rushing. He didn't want to break the moment. The air felt charged, heavy with expectation, though the room continued its usual background noise. People had stopped moving, unconsciously gathering closer. Some held their breath. Others whispered quietly, but none interrupted. It was as if the piano itself had drawn everyone's attention, and the man standing before it held the key to something extraordinary. His hands hovered over the keys for a moment, just above the black and white patterns, feeling the cool surface beneath his fingertips. He closed his eyes briefly, letting the sounds in his memory guide him. The smell of polished wood and the faint scent of old varnish brought back memories of other pianos, other rooms, other times when music had been his only friend. He remembered being small, hiding behind a piano stool, pressing keys softly so no one would hear. Music had always been private, sacred, a way to survive when the world felt too loud. Opening his eyes, he positioned his fingers carefully. He wasn't thinking about the crowd or the whispers around him. He only thought about the first note. It needed to be perfect, not for applause, not for recognition, but because it had to be right. It had to respect the piano, the space, and the moment. He pressed a single key. The sound floated through the room, soft but clear, and people shifted slightly, caught off guard by the beauty of something so simple. The note was not loud, but it resonated, reaching ears and hearts in a way that made everyone pause. Conversations stopped. Phones were lowered. Even footsteps seemed to slow, as if the room itself wanted to hear more. A second note followed, then a third. They were deliberate, careful, like steps on a path he had walked countless times before. Each note carried emotion, not in a showy way, but subtly, gently. It was as if he were telling a story only he knew, and everyone who listened felt part of it, whether they wanted to or not. People exchanged glances, astonished by the contrast between his quiet presence and the powerful beauty of the music. A small crowd began to form, drawn by the sound. None of them had expected this. Most had assumed he was just a man asking for a chance he didn't deserve. Now they were mesmerized. Some felt tears forming in their eyes. Some felt a lump in their throats, a sudden awareness of something moving inside them that they hadn't expected. Music, so simple, so unassuming, could change a room completely. He closed his eyes again, letting the rhythm flow naturally. His fingers moved with precision, yet there was a freedom in the movement, a connection to memory and feeling that no one could imitate. The piano responded as if it had been waiting for him all along, each key bending to his will, each chord creating an atmosphere of quiet wonder. Time seemed to slow, the space around him shrinking to just him, the piano, and the notes that floated between them. Some people in the crowd began to whisper softly, sharing their thoughts without realizing it. Who is he? How can he play like that? He must have practiced forever. No one knew the truth. He had practiced, yes, but often alone, with no audience, with no expectation beyond the music itself. The piano had been his companion through years of struggle, his solace through hard times, and now it allowed him to speak in a language everyone could understand. A child, watching from the front of the crowd, leaned forward with wide eyes. They had never seen someone play with such emotion. The gentle rise and fall of the music made them feel something they couldn't name. Their small hands twitched, wanting to touch the keys too, but they were content to watch, feeling the power of someone else's talent fill the room. The staff member who had allowed him to play stepped back, silently amazed. They had expected someone to fumble, to stumble, to create noise that would annoy or disrupt. Instead, they witnessed art that seemed effortless. The man had not asked for permission to perform. He had asked for permission to touch. And even that small act had turned into something transformative. He didn't rush. He didn't try to impress anyone. There were no sudden flourishes, no showy gestures. Every movement of his hands was meaningful, deliberate, full of respect. Each note spoke of patience, of longing, of quiet persistence. The crowd was drawn in, silent except for the music. Even the background noise of the building seemed to fade, leaving only the connection between him, the piano, and the people listening. Someone near the back felt tears prickle their eyes. They had no reason to feel moved, yet they did. They felt the weight of his journey in the notes he played. The music was unspoken words, a story of a life lived quietly, full of longing, hope, and persistence. It was not about him. It was about something universal that everyone recognized in their own way. Time passed, though it was impossible to tell exactly how long. Each note, each chord built on the last, weaving a tapestry of sound that seemed to suspend reality. People forgot their phones, their schedules, their distractions. They were part of this moment, whether they realized it or not. The man opened his eyes slightly, glancing around briefly. He saw faces softened, eyes glimmering with emotions they did not fully understand. He didn't smile or seek approval. He simply played, letting the music tell the story. As the piece continued, subtle variations in tempo and tone created layers of feeling. He used silence as much as sound, allowing pauses that made the next notes even more powerful. The piano's voice became his own, yet it was more than that. It spoke for everyone who had ever felt unseen, unheard, or underestimated. A group of people in the corner exchanged glances, whispered quickly, then looked back in awe. They had come expecting a mundane moment, perhaps a minor distraction. Instead, they witnessed a transformation. The piano was no longer just an instrument. The man was no longer just a stranger. They were part of something delicate, something rare, something that could not be forced or repeated at will. He played a final chord, not loud or dramatic, but quiet and lasting. The resonance hung in the air, making the space feel fuller, warmer, deeper. People exhaled without realizing it, as if they had been holding their breath through the entire performance. Some clutched their hands to their chests, feeling the echo of the music in their bodies. For a moment, silence returned. The room was still, almost sacred. The man's hands hovered over the keys, not moving, as if honoring the space between notes. Then he slowly lifted them, letting them rest at his sides. His gaze swept the crowd briefly, acknowledging without words the shared experience. He had not sought admiration. He had not sought recognition. He had only asked for a chance to touch the piano, and in doing so, he had given something unforgettable to everyone present. People started to stir, slowly, quietly. Some clapped softly at first, unsure if it was appropriate, then louder as the realization sank in. Some whispered words of praise. Others simply stared, unable to speak. He stepped back from the piano, nodding slightly to the staff who had granted him the small permission that had created this moment. The magic of the music lingered in the air. The notes, though now silent, seemed to resonate in hearts and minds, leaving everyone changed in some subtle, unspoken way. And the man, without a word, quietly turned and walked away, leaving the piano and the room behind, carrying only the memory of the moment he had created. The room was still after the last note, but the air felt different now. There was a quiet energy that seemed to hum in the space, a gentle tension that was both moving and profound. People remained where they were, some holding their hands together, some leaning slightly forward, and all of them trying to hold onto the feeling that had passed through them like a warm wave. The man stepped back slowly from the piano, his hands relaxed at his sides. He did not rush. There was no hurry. Each movement was deliberate, careful, respectful. The piano, once a silent object, seemed to glow with the memory of the music. The polished surface reflected the dim light, and the keys still vibrated softly from the touch that had passed over them. People were silent, unsure how to respond. Some blinked rapidly, trying to process the beauty they had just witnessed. Some covered their mouths, overwhelmed by emotion. A few had tears in their eyes, tears they hadn't expected to shed. The man did not look at them. He did not need their approval. His purpose had been fulfilled the moment the first note had resonated through the room. The staff member who had allowed him to play stood a few feet away, staring at him in awe. They had expected a small, polite performance, maybe a few notes played carefully. What they had witnessed was something beyond their understanding, something that had reached into the hearts of everyone present. They realized that the man had not asked for permission to perform. He had asked for permission to touch. And through that small request, he had created something much bigger than anyone could have anticipated. A soft murmur started in the crowd, voices speaking almost reverently, as if afraid to disturb the moment. "Did you hear that?" someone whispered. Another responded, "It was beautiful. More than beautiful." There was a shared understanding forming among them, a connection created by something beyond words. The man took a deep breath, letting the silence hold him. He felt a sense of peace wash over him. Music had always been his escape, his way of understanding the world, and now it had given something back to those who had only been observers. For a brief moment he was not a stranger. He was a storyteller, a guide through emotions that people had forgotten how to recognize. Some people began to approach him quietly, wanting to acknowledge what they had felt. One woman stepped forward, her eyes wide, hands trembling slightly. "Thank you," she said softly. "I didn't know a piano could do that." He nodded respectfully, a faint smile brushing his lips, but he did not speak. Words were not necessary. The music had said everything. A young man in the back of the room whispered to a friend, "I've never felt anything like that. It's like he told a story with his hands." The friend nodded, unable to respond. They felt moved in a way that surprised them, the kind of feeling that makes you want to cry and smile at the same time. He stepped away from the piano, giving space to the room and the people in it. The crowd shifted, creating a small circle around him, drawn by the quiet power of what had occurred. No one spoke too loudly. No one laughed or made casual remarks. The shared understanding was palpable, something sacred in the midst of a busy, ordinary day. Some began to clap slowly, carefully, as if the sound needed to be measured, respectful. Others joined in, more loudly, and soon the room was filled with the sound of applause. It was not raucous or demanding, but heartfelt. It was not about admiration for a performer. It was about acknowledgement of a moment that could not be forgotten. He nodded once again, acknowledging the applause, and then turned toward the exit. He did not linger, did not ask for attention, and did not demand recognition. His eyes were calm, reflecting the quiet satisfaction of someone who had completed something important. His purpose had been simple: to touch, to play, to share a part of himself. And in doing so, he had changed the space and perhaps the people within it, in a way that would linger long after he left. The crowd slowly began to disperse, but the energy remained. People spoke in hushed tones, sharing what they had experienced, replaying the music in their minds. Some returned to their routines, but they did so differently, carrying the echo of something beautiful in their hearts. The piano sat quietly, waiting for the next person, but the room had been altered by what had occurred. There was a sense of possibility, of wonder, of understanding that even in brief moments, beauty could emerge where it was least expected. The staff members exchanged glances, a mixture of relief and awe on their faces. They had been uncertain at first, hesitant to grant permission, concerned about rules and responsibility. Now they realized that what they had witnessed could not have happened without that small act of trust. It was a reminder that sometimes the smallest decisions create the biggest impacts. The man walked down the hall slowly, his movements unhurried. He did not seek attention or follow-up questions. He carried himself with the quiet dignity of someone who had fulfilled a personal promise, someone who had experienced and shared something meaningful. The day would continue around him, but the memory of the music, the piano, and the shared emotion would remain with those who had been present. People who had seen him play would think back to that moment often. They would remember the patience, the humility, and the unexpected beauty. Some would tell others, trying to convey the feeling, though words could never capture it fully. Others would sit quietly, revisiting the memory in solitude, letting the music echo in their minds. The man's actions reminded everyone that talent and beauty are not always visible at first glance, that the desire to create, to share, and to connect can exist in the most unlikely people, and that sometimes all it takes is a small chance, a simple permission, to allow something extraordinary to unfold. Even after he left, the room felt different. The piano remained, but it seemed to hum with memory, filled with the notes he had played. People returned to their routines, but they carried with them a sense of awe, a reminder that life could hold unexpected wonders. The music had not just filled the room. It had filled hearts, sparked emotions, and created a quiet, lasting impact. For the man, the experience was not about recognition or praise. It was about a connection to something larger than himself, a reminder of why he loved music and why he had persevered through years of practice, solitude, and patience. The piano had been a bridge, and through it, he had shared a piece of his soul with everyone who had listened, even if they didn't fully understand. The day moved on, the room emptied, but the moment lingered in memory. And somewhere in the distance, the man walked quietly, carrying the satisfaction of a promise kept, knowing that he had touched more than just the keys of a piano. He had touched hearts, created wonder, and reminded people of the quiet, extraordinary moments that life sometimes offers. The man walked slowly through the hallways after leaving the piano. He did not hurry. He did not look back, though he knew some were still watching, still thinking about the music he had created. He felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. The moment had passed, but it had left a mark, not just on him, but on everyone who had heard the notes, everyone who had felt the vibrations, everyone who had let themselves be moved by the sound. Outside, the world continued as it always did. People were walking, talking, rushing to appointments or errands. Yet, for some who had been inside, the day now held a subtle difference. Something had shifted. The simple act of allowing a man to touch a piano had created an experience that words could not fully explain. It was quiet, unspoken, but it lingered in minds and hearts. He thought about the path that had brought him here. Years of practice in silence, of learning without guidance, of touching pianos alone in rooms where no one noticed. There were times when he had almost given up, when doubt and fear had threatened to overwhelm him. But music had always been there, waiting, patient as he had been. Now, at last, he had shared a piece of that with the world. People in the room were still talking quietly about what had happened. Some replayed the sequence of notes in their minds, trying to remember each one, each subtle pause, each delicate transition. Others spoke of the way he moved, the way he seemed to communicate more than words could allow. There was a shared understanding forming between strangers, a feeling that they had been part of something rare, something worth remembering. A child who had been watching tugged on a parent's sleeve. "Can I play the piano like that?" they asked softly. The parent smiled, unsure how to answer. "Maybe someday," they said, "but it takes practice and patience and love." The child nodded, holding on to the hope that someone had just shown them was possible. The staff members cleaned and prepared the piano for the next use, but the air felt different. The room seemed warmer, lighter, as if it remembered what had just happened. One staff member paused and placed their hand gently on the polished wood, a silent acknowledgement of the beauty that had been created. They knew that not every day would bring such a moment, but they also knew it had changed something within them, something lasting. The man continued walking, heading for the exit. Each step felt purposeful yet calm. He did not need recognition. He did not need applause. He had been given a chance to touch, to play, and that was enough. The connection he had felt through the piano, through the music, through the shared experience with the people around him, was more than enough. It was complete. Outside, the air was cool, carrying the usual city sounds. Cars, distant voices, birds. The ordinary world had not changed, but he felt that he had changed, and perhaps in small ways so had those who had watched. The music would live on in their memories, and that was the kind of impact that did not fade quickly. He walked past people who did not know the story, who had not heard the notes, and yet he felt a sense of contentment. Music was for everyone, whether they heard it that day or not. Its presence in the world mattered more than recognition. He had shared it, and that act alone was enough to fulfill the purpose he had carried quietly for so long. As he turned a corner, he thought about the moments of his past, the rooms where pianos had been his only friends. Each note he had played over the years had been practice for this moment, preparation for a connection he had hoped would come. Now it had, and it had done more than he could have imagined. People had seen more than just fingers on keys. They had seen patience, humility, dedication, and the quiet power of an honest heart. Back in the room, people lingered. Conversations began, but always returned to the music, to the experience of witnessing something genuine. Some shared the story with colleagues or friends later that day, trying to convey the weight of what had happened. Others reflected silently, revisiting the melody in their minds and letting it move them in private. The impact of the man's actions was not immediate in every case, but it was enduring. The piano sat quietly, waiting for someone else, but it held a memory now, a vibration of the music that had filled the room. It had been touched by hands that understood it, hands that had told a story through motion and sound. The room seemed to carry a faint echo of that story, a subtle reminder that beauty could emerge from the most unexpected places. The man continued his walk through the city, feeling neither pride nor arrogance. He had done what he had wanted to do, and that was enough. Each step he took felt lighter, as if he were walking in rhythm with the music that still hummed in his memory. He thought about other pianos, other moments, and other chances he might be given or might create. Life had taught him to wait patiently, to respect opportunity, and to act with sincerity. People who had witnessed him were slowly returning to their routines. Some carried a sense of awe, others a quiet hope, and some simply a memory of beauty that could not be explained. The music had reached them in a way that transcended words, and in that, it had become something larger than any one person, something shared, something communal. He walked past cafes, stores, and streets filled with ordinary moments, and yet each step felt significant. The music had changed him subtly, just as it had changed those who listened. He understood now, more than ever, that his persistence, his patience, and his respect for the piano and for the moment had created something lasting. It was a gift not just to himself but to everyone who had heard. Eventually, he reached the edge of the street and paused, taking a deep breath. The city moved around him, life continued, and he felt a sense of fulfillment unlike any other. The piano had been touched, the notes had been heard, and the moment had become a memory that would not fade easily. He smiled softly, a quiet acknowledgement of what had been achieved, and then continued walking, carrying with him the echo of the music and the wonder it had created. And somewhere behind him, the piano remained, silent and waiting, holding the memory of what had been, ready for the next moment, the next person, the next chance to create something extraordinary.